what was the beginning of the spark? Like, what was the original kind of birthing of a spiritual appetite or curiosity for you?
To teach or to...
for your path,
for
initially.
my own discovery?
Yeah, like, was that always there? Or was...
Yes, in a very natural way, like very unrealized way, if that makes sense. So it wasn't a conscious thought that, oh, I'm conscious of something that's inspiring me. But very much so, especially looking back, like I'm able to place it all in such a clear context. I can see that ever since I can remember myself being human, I just had this sort of indescribable sense of limitlessness, or everything is possible. I always felt everything is possible, like everything is possible. So I had this, and I guess a lot of kids have it in many ways. I just remember it being very palpable for me, very visceral, it was an actual belief system, like it was an actual conviction. I was convinced everything is possible. So whenever it seemed like things were not possible, it didn't make any sense to me. It just didn't make sense, like everything is possible. You know, I always felt like I'm Superman or whatever, I'm about to fly and take off. Now this spark allowed me to always, throughout childhood up to the age of 12, I'd say, 11, 12, to be really spontaneous and really just feeling completely free and connected within myself to something bigger. And around that age, I started forgetting. I started to lose track of that sense, that feeling. And I became more like people, more like the average Joe that we see walking around the street, not really aware of any special, magnificent connection within.
And were you aware that something was, you were losing touch with something?
It
was in hindsight you could look back.
In hindsight.
Yeah.
So I was not aware because it happened gradually around the time that I went to high school, I think. And in Holland, this is. I realized it maybe 3 years later, at the age of 15. I just stopped at some point. I was like, for the past 4 years or so, there's been drama in my life. There's been like weird things. There's been this sense of not being myself. I'm just like, I'm trying to live for other people. I'm trying to blend in. I'm trying to fit in. I'm trying to be somebody. And I suddenly remembered very clearly how I used to be. And how I used to be was just like, I didn't care what anyone thought, you know, it's just free. And the only exception is that I was always very careful of making sure I did the right thing. Mm-hmm. But other than that, there was no real sense of I care what people think about me. I was always free doing crazy things. So I remembered that so clearly from that contrasting experience of having a sense of depression to this is not who I am. Like this is so in a sense, the depression, the layer that I put over my light, the dusty layer that I put on my mirror, so to speak, became dense enough for me to wake up, basically, to feel like, okay, wait, something is wrong here. This is not who I am. This is not how I remember myself to be. So I started seeking for, I was exposed before that time to, like around the age of 10, I was exposed to books like The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and I did Silva Mind Control course for kids, which is about basic meditation techniques and using the mind in the alpha wave frequencies and the theta wave frequencies. So I had this background as a kid, and that was very much, for me, that resonated at the time as a confirmation that humans were actually doing something that confirmed everything was possible. It's like, oh, hey, it does make sense here on Earth. It makes sense that everything is possible. But still, I forgot about that, or it became less important for me for a period of about 4 years. So then I had that wake-up call, and I started out researching telekinesis for some reason. I don't know exactly how that happened, but so I joined a couple websites and blogs and communities of people actually practicing like moving light objects without touching them.
This was the Superman thing still going on, right?
What?
This was the Superman kind of like quality, right?
Yeah, it was the Superman quality, yeah. So the kid came back like, hey, I can do everything. Okay, right. So let me prove it by doing something everyone believes to be impossible, right? So I started practicing that, did that for maybe 5-6 months, pretty intensely. Was engaged in that community. I got my first real hit of what it's like to teach and be a teacher in online communities in that regard. I got my confirmations of being able to move certain objects without touching them. And then I realized, like, okay, I've been practicing this for 5 months, and I was like, every once in a while I could roll a pen. And it's like, but I've been practicing intensely for 5 or 6 months, and this is all that, I'm not doing anything significant per se. It's just party tricks.
You want to move the world, not a pen, right?
Exactly. I want to transform the world. It's not going to happen from here. So I woke up from that, and I was like, well, okay, so this is a nice confirmation. This feels good. This feels empowering. Feels like it's a representation of who I really am. However, it doesn't take me where I want to go. So I realized that in order to really master any aspect of life, I would have to know the source of all of it. So this was when I was around 15 years old. So I remember having this thought. I was practicing telekinesis. I was like, I'm kind of tired of practicing. Do I really want to practice for the next 10 years until I can like levitate a chair? It doesn't seem that appealing to me.
Right.
The payoff doesn't seem big enough for the practice. So there must be a faster way. There must be a faster way to understanding all aspects and having mastery over all aspects. Now, over time, that shifted from, became less important to have physical mastery and more important to have emotional mastery and mental mastery and well-being mastery and touching lives and inspiration and all that stuff. But at the time, it was very much like I want to master everything. Like the everything is possibleness. Like I want that. So how do I achieve that? What's the quickest way? And I just had this insight. I need to know the source of all of it. If I can focus my minimal amount of time. We all have minimum amount of time available in this life. So I was like, okay, if I just devote all that energy into one thing instead of trying to master all these aspects, what should I pour it into? And so source came up, like the source of all of it, because then you have mastery over all of it. Yeah.
And it's interesting as well. I was just reflecting as you were talking. It's a very Generation Y or whatever generation we kind of are approached like, I want it now. Yeah. Like I want to do it quickly, and I want it now. And it's interesting. It's like when you ask a different question, you come from a different place. Often new possibilities get opened as well.
Sweet. Yes.
Yeah.
So then I shifted to that, and I think one of the first books I came in contact with that was really deliberately looking for the source of all of life, like enlightenment, reaching the absolute or the ultimate, was the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So I was probably 15, 16 years old, and I started studying the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I joined a yoga meditation teacher training that lasted 3 years. And so I started meditating and contemplating, and I was very deliberate in this, very fiery, so to speak, like no nonsense, like cutting through all the bullshit. Excuse me.
No, you can swear here. It's okay.
Oh, we can swear.
Yeah.
I love this company, consciously.com. My kind of people.
We had someone, just as an aside, we had someone on Tuesday night, and he was like, "Can I swear?" I was like, "We've had loads of F-bombs." We've had a C-bomb. I was like, "No, of course you have a C-bomb." So I think basically anything's allowed now. So just like wherever you want to go.
Okay, excellent. Okay.
Anyway, so there you were kind of you just read the sutras, and you were kind of intense in terms of this search.
Yeah, very much so. And I spent time with my yoga teacher at the time, meditation teacher, and she was lovely. She was amazing. She was my first sort of proper teacher, and in some senses my only, because it was consistent for 3 years, and I never stayed with a teacher for longer than like a week or so. So this was my first experience of having that type of teacher-student relationship within that yoga meditation training. And as awesome as she was, and her instructions were, it was too much. There were all these housewomen. How do you call that?
Housewives.
Housewives.
Right.
Yes. Sorry. And they were talking about like seeing all these beautiful blue little lights in their meditation, and like, oh, this is so lovely and that's so lovely. And I was like, okay, I love you guys, but like I want enlightenment. Where's this going? Like let's cut to the chase there. So a lot of that kind of stuff felt very redundant to me. Felt very much like, and even some of the meditations that we were asked to do, just felt like it was going around in circles, and it wasn't going straight to what I wanted, which is source, which is clarity, which is enlightenment, which is the absolute totality.
Yeah, you didn't just want to feel better, or you wanted something radical. You wanted to know.
I wanted to not waste any time and get to the very source of everything. So I left a year early, and it just didn't resonate to finish it, and I went to India instead. I was like, okay, where's the source of what I'm doing here? And the source of yoga is considered to be Rishikesh, India. So I was like, okay, I'll go there. So around the age of, I think it was 17 or 18, I went to live in Rishikesh for 6 months and go visit all kinds of teachers there, do all kinds of trainings and yoga, meditation, but also other kinds of teachings, more traditional satsang type of experiences. Non-duality, awakening, direct awakening. I read a ton of Osho at the time. I read like 20, 25 books of his, I think, which was one of the most influential at that period in my life. And so I started getting glimpses of what I was actually looking for, which in my experience at the time was, I don't know how I described it at the time, but right now I would just simply call it awareness or pure awareness. So the experience of the non-dual state of consciousness. The only problem was that I believed there were obstacles to this. I believed that I had to train and meditate and quiet my mind. That's what I was told all the time. But even that didn't resonate. Even that felt like it's not cutting to the chase. Like this is a theme in my life. It's like, no, how can we do this faster? How can we do this now? How can we do this more efficiently? So I was very much like, something is off even about this. So I would quiet my mind, I would have the experience, and then my mind would come back. Something like that. So at some point I started to notice that even when I'm busy thinking, even when I'm caught up in distraction, that which I recognized without thinking is also still there when I am thinking. And that really blew up for me. Like that was like, oh, nice, because now you can't go anywhere. Like now you're stuck with enlightenment, basically.
Was that a moment, or was it like a series? Was it like a gradual kind of clarifying?
It was pretty much a moment. I mean, the deepening of it and the really making it clear is still continuing.
It's a lifetime, sure.
It's infinite. But I remember very clearly having a shift of like, hey, it's more than anything, it wasn't an experience, it was a shift in how I approached it, a shift in understanding the truth of it. So very easily, very simply, I just realized that which I realize in those moments, in those glimpses, is always here. And then I started seeing that all over the place.
And when you had that moment, did it feel significant at the time? Was it like, this is the thing that this is all about, or was it like it happened and then you gradually were looking back and you kind of started to realize the significance of the experience?
It felt pretty significant to me,
right.
But also because I was personally so invested in this journey, right? Like from the age of 15 to the age of like 19 or something like that, I had been seeking intensely every single day, and I traveled to India for it, I lived there, etc. So for me, it was a very personal thing as well. And also I had this like stressful relationship with any teacher I would go to, all the swamis and the gurus and even the books that I read. So this was for me total liberation of, this was confirmation of that what I always felt in all these classes was true for me. Like there is a faster way. It is already here. It is very direct. It isn't hard to achieve. So that all got confirmed in that moment. So personally, from a personal point of view, it was very significant release of tension for me. Both of all my teacher-student relationships. Now I felt like I am my own guru.
Right.
I have realized what I set out to realize. And that turned out to just be a tiny part of my realization. But at the time, it felt significant. Yeah,
I was going to say, at the time, did it feel like this is it? Like this is everything that I've been looking for? Or was it like this is a taste of it? And because obviously, as you say, that there's then, and this is often true, people, they have these big experiences, and then there's a whole integration process that often's ongoing.
The integration process was ongoing, and I realized that probably would be ongoing. But there was some kind of permanent shift in that, which again is the way that I understood what was going on.
Right.
But that makes all the difference, because it had a finality to it. It had an achievement to it, a sense of like having achieved, because now that I saw that it's always already here, I could never truly unsee that.
Right.
I could maybe fool myself for a little period of time, but it was very clearly something I could return to no matter what.
Yes.
Because everything became a confirmation of awareness, like every experience confirms awareness.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what happens anymore.
And what did that do to your life? Because you say like you'd been totally committed to, invested since you were 15, like you were going to find source, and then you have that experience. What happened to your life from that point?
Ironically, I became extremely depressed.
Is that right? I don't know why we're laughing. But
no, you can laugh. It's funny. You laugh.
Well, it kind of is. It's like it's not what you expect to happen, right?
Like you achieve enlightenment and you get intensely depressed.
Right.
Yeah, I get super depressed. I get super anxious. I get super. I felt completely stuck. At this point, I moved to Dharamsala from Rishikesh, and just everything was falling apart. Everything that held my sense of humanness alive, so to speak. My relationship, my circumstances, my finances, my goals in life. And also as a result of this thing, like I've given so much intention and meaning to this, and now it was all meaningless. Like everything became meaningless for a period of time, like intensely meaningless. Like I couldn't conjure up any motivation to do anything, because why would I?
I mean, it's interesting. It's in some ways it sounds like the same experience I've, people I've known that have had in other spheres of life. Like, let's say the goal was, was to become a multimillionaire and sell a business, and it's like, and they get to that point and they're actually depressed on the other side, because it's like their whole life has been defined by, like, when I get there, I'm gonna, and the whole dream is that they're going to retire and live on a beach. But there's someone that the thing that most fires them up, of course, is solving problems and leading people, and they're not doing that anymore.
Excellent.
So it's like you reach that kind of pinnacle.
Exactly.
It's kind of fascinating. It's like you get there and it's like, fuck, like what do I do now?
Yeah, that is why the journey is the point, right?
Right.
But once we realize that, and we realize that the journey is infinite and endless, then we're good.
Right. Yeah, but that took a
as
while.
Long as we believe, we're always like, as long as we believe it's about the end result.
Right.
And as long as we believe that after the end result, everything else stops or something like that, then we'll always have that struggle.
So that was another insight then that came, that then you recognize that it's like it wasn't an end point, that actually in a sense it was just a point in the journey. Or
I'm not sure I realized that at that very point, like in those 6 months after my awakening, I was just like my personality was being deconstructed completely. Like everything I knew was being like torn apart and taken away. So yeah, I was pretty depressed for, I'd say, about 6 to 12 months afterwards, and I came back to Holland. I lived with my parents, and that's really when these realizations started to, where the rubber started to meet the road, so to speak. And I was like, okay, integration time. Like, okay, so you've realized what you wanted to realize. All the intention like got sucked out of you, the intensity of it. All meaning disappeared. You couldn't see any meaning in anything, no motivation for anything. Your life is falling apart.
And that's kind of the ultimate depression, I imagine.
That's the what?
The ultimate depression, in some ways. It's like
the existential crisis depression, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It felt that way. Like I didn't know where to go, what to do.
Right. And it's not the kind of depression you go and see a therapist about, right? Because it's like they're not going to provide much insight. In a sense.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's where I realized a lot of things. Like that's when I started to build my teaching in a way. Like that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's like, okay, now I'm this what seems to be a human having an awakening experience, or having had a profound awakening experience, and now the integration happens, now the practice happens, so to speak, now the application happens. So that's where I started to really delve into all the fine psychological details of how to apply and how to return to awareness from all kinds of different states, and etc. So that's where the beginning of my teaching in this light started to emerge. So that was around the age of, 19, 20, I think. So I started shooting my first like little YouTube clips in my attic at my parents' house, and got a little bit of exposure, got invited to a few interviews, and Conscious TV was one of them.
And how was that at kind of, 1920? It's like certainly most people in this country are going down the pub and we call it getting pissed in this country. I don't know, getting drunk. But it's like, that's
we call it becoming English.
Is that right? That's great. No. As a complete aside, I was watching a program with my wife last night about British people on holiday. It's like so embarrassing. Like they just go out and just
it's really
like
show you just see this,
especially in Holland, right? In Amsterdam, it's like just
all hilarious.
Anyway, just coming back to the story. So you were 19, 20, and you were putting out videos and you were kind of sharing teaching. What was that like? It must have been a pretty interesting experience in a sense that it's like, you're kind of probably half the age of many of the people that you're teaching to.
Yeah.
What was that like on a kind of personal level, being with that?
I didn't really care about the age thing or anything else. I was just inspired to share. I just knew like, okay, this is what I feel really inspired to do, and it felt really clear, so I did it. I remember there were a few moments where there was some kind of a personal anxiety about like capturing myself on video and doing that stuff, but it was only in the very early days after that just started flowing. I became really comfortable with that. And yeah, ever after that, it's just continued to evolve and snowball. And I mean, it's a crazy fucking life. I mean, ever since it's just been, there's no structure. There's no, things just change and evolve so fast over and over again.